Hello, welcome to another episode of New Gameplay. Today I'm your host, Jeff Cork, joined today by Alex Van Aken.
Hello.
And someone who used to be my enemy, but is now my friend. It's Brian Shea!
Hey, good to hear from you, Jeff.
How's it going, buddy?
It's going all right. We've just been spending a lot of time with this game, Persona 5 Strikers.
Persona 5 Strikers. So it's a turn-based RPG, correct?
That would be the original Persona 5. This is actually a game that is co-developed by Atlus's P Studio, which is the developer behind the original Persona series, as well as Omega Force, which you might know from the Warriors game. So, Dynasty Warriors, and most recently they've been working a lot on the Zelda franchise with Hyrule Warriors, those two games. So if you played Hyrule Warriors, you might realize that, it's basically just like, all right, this is Dynasty Warriors with like a Zelda coat of paint and like the characters and everything. Persona 5 Strikers, I kind of went in expecting that, where it's like, all right, I'm just going to be dumped in an area and go around and like slash through thousands of enemies. But it's actually a lot closer to what I would think of as like a sequel to Persona 5, but instead of the turn-based combat, it's more of like the warrior style of combat. But like other than that, like the pacing of the game is much more akin to like the original Persona 5, where there's a lot of dialogue, there's a lot of like kind of dungeon exploration, and just when you have those encounters, instead of going into a turn-based fare, you go into something like this, where you're just, you're slashing down hordes of enemies using kind of warrior style combat.
Okay. So would you say then, is it fair to say that Persona 5 Strikers is Yakuza 0 to Persona 5's Yakuza Like a Dragon?
Wow. I mean, I would say it's a little bit more over the top than the combat in Yakuza 0.
Okay.
Like, if you've ever played any of the Warriors games, like, you're just going to be doing just ridiculous moves, like action over the top nonsense on like just like 25 enemies with a single strike. So you don't really get that with Yakuza. It's usually pretty much 1-to-1, 1-on-2 combat in Yakuza, but like
maybe the way you play.
But with this, like like the combat, it almost feels like when like Final Fantasy has like a direct sequel, like the rare instance that Final Fantasy has a direct sequel, and it's like, all right, this kind of maintains some of the tone, but they completely change up the combat system or something like that. That's almost what this feels like, because like the story is a continuation of the original Persona 5. So it's not the continuation of Persona 5 Royal, which came out last year, which added a few additional characters, added a new story arc at the end. Mm-hmm. This is a continuation of the original, as far as I can tell. So there's no Kasumi, who is the new character, the new Phantom Thief introduced in Persona 5 Royal. Instead, this does introduce a new character to the cast of the original Persona 5, which you saw briefly there, Sophia. Yep. She is an artificial intelligence character that, she is pretty powerful. She uses yo-yos, which like gives her like additional range and like is super satisfying for dealing with enemies in like the Musu kind of combat, where it's just like, you're basically using like the yo-yo as like a windshield wiper to kind of like swipe through a ton of enemies at once.
Like a Rygar type, basically.
What was that?
Like Rygar.
Sure. So, but you can see like it has the cast of the original Persona 5. So all the voice actors, the English voice actors return.
Oh, cool.
Has a lot of the same enemies. But instead of like just the straight up like, all right, you can use heavy and light attacks, you can also use, there you go, right there, gun attacks like in Persona 5. You can, when you knock enemies down on their weaknesses, you can use all-out attacks, and then you can also summon your personas to attack like elemental weaknesses, and that allows you to knock them down and perform the all-out attacks. You can also swap between party members at any time. So right now, this is Alex Van Aken playing. He's currently playing as Joker, but if he wanted to switch to Skull, for example, he could just by pressing the D-pad. And then, each character has their own personas with different elemental attacks. So, like Mona, for example, has wind attacks, and Skull has electric attacks, and Panther will have fire attacks. So all those kind of allow you to get different elemental advantages. And that's where like your knowledge from Persona 5 will really come in handy.
Yeah. And I mean, just like the Persona series, you can equip, you defeat enemies and unlock new personas to equip.
Yeah, so
on your
as
characters.
you fight these enemies, you'll get new personas for Joker to absorb, and then the Velvet Room returns as well. So the Velvet Room, if you played Persona 5, you can go there to fuse new personas. You can go there to, you know, power up personas and register personas like in like a current state that you have them in. Those abilities are back. So like there are some elements of the original Persona 5 where it is just like it feels very familiar to you if you've played that game. That also carries into like the outside of the metaverse kind of areas where you're in dialogue with these characters so much, and that's really what I was wanting from this game. Was like I love the characters of Persona 5 so much. Like that's what really made me like fall in love with that game. Aside from like the turn-based combat was awesome, the story itself is really cool, but like the characters and like the story and the journey that they're on is what really made me fall in love with that game.
Yeah.
And it's cool to see them like kind of pick up 6 months later. You know, they're all in kind of slightly different places in their lives. Some of them are bigger places than like bigger differences than other characters. Like Makoto, for example, is in college now. She's no longer in high school. So like, you know, they're in different places in their lives and they decide they're going to go on a summer road trip basically across Japan. So what you're seeing right now is the Shibuya stage. So this is all like kind of within the areas that were explored in Persona 5. Obviously, it's different like dungeons, but you're going to see other areas that across Japan that you didn't see in Persona 5. Since that was
And
restricted.
I have a question for you, Shay.
Okay.
You know, I am not a Persona guy. I played probably 10 hours of Persona 4 years after it came out on Vita, and really enjoyed it, but I just kind of fell off. So I am not a fan of Persona. It's always something that's interested me, and one thing that, you know, this game has kind of, you know, playing Persona 5 Strikers, I'm like, man, I should go back and play, you know, Persona 5, like the actual game. But my question is, how does this dungeon compare to the dungeons, you know, in P5? Are they like very similar, or?
So this is the first dungeon of Persona 5 Strikers. So it could very well get more intricate, but I would say it's comparable, if not maybe slightly faster paced. Like the combat is a little bit more frequent, but it's not like way more frequent. Like you're still like there's right now this footage is still pretty early on in like the dungeon of Strikers, but when you compare it to the palaces of Persona 5, which is what they're called in Persona 5, I don't know if they've actually referenced these as palaces like proper within Persona 5 Strikers in the story to this point. But it's the same concept. Like this is like kind of like the cognitive world where all of the like kind of the corrupt shadows and like corrupt cognitions exist. I would say it's pretty it's comparable. I would say that the ones in Persona 5 proper are a bit more intricate in terms of like the navigation.
Sure.
Like this part that you're playing right now is extremely linear. Like this is basically like a tutorial section that you're seeing.
For sure.
And like as you mentioned right now, you get the new persona to join your squad. But yeah, as you play, I think that like I mean, I've continued playing the Shibuya dungeon in Persona 5 Strikers. It's a jail. It's themed after a jail, and it's it gets more intricate than what we're seeing in this footage. You can read more about it on GameInformer.com. I wrote some extended impressions about my early hour time with Persona 5 Strikers. And yeah, I think that it feels like a fun successor to the original, which is more than I think I was expecting. Like I said, I was kind of going into this expecting like Hyrule Warriors style, where it was just like
set
Dynasty
dressing.
Warriors with a Zelda coat of paint. But like they've really done a cool job of like making it feel like, you know, best of both worlds type of scenario where it's all the characters and enemies and everything that you know, but there's also a really cool Persona story behind it. So far, I mean, obviously I can't beyond the Shibuya stage, but like it's the same gameplay loop. You know, you hear like rumors about how like there's this corrupt person that's taking advantage of people. You investigate to see like what the deal behind that is, and then you go in and infiltrate their dungeon or their palace, whatever the actual nomenclature is for Persona 5 Strikers, and then from there you challenge them in a boss battle, and then hopefully change them in the real world based on like changing their shadow.
That makes
First
sense,
one is
yeah.
set in a sewer, and you said that the second one is set in a prison.
No, well, this is just kind of like the beginning of the first dungeon, really. But as there's going to be a sequence after this battle where you leave this dungeon, go back to the real world, and then when you return, the entire, basically like the Shibuya crossing area of Shibuya is themed after a jail, like a giant, like extravagant jail.
So it just looks like this, but with bars, right?
Now there's like searchlights. I mean, but you're
Okay.
off the top side. You're up on the streets.
Okay.
Yeah, this is just kind of like, this is where the gang discovered Sophia, the new Phantom Thief, which after this area where you leave the dungeon, go back to the real world, you learn a lot more about what that character is. And Sophia helps you out in a lot of ways. Like she'll give you background to like what's going on. She'll give you you can buy stuff through her, so like you don't have to like run around to different shops in town like you do in Persona 5. Like if you want medicine, you have to go to the clinic. If you want weapons, you have to go to the gun store. So Sophia's very handy in that regard too. I'm sure that we'll learn more. The other thing that I want to talk about real quick before we wrap up is the social aspect of this. There's no like social links or anything like that. Instead, you have bonds which you develop through doing combat and defeating enemies in these dungeons, and those level up different skills and attributes of the various party members. So it's a little bit different there, and I'm a little disappointed in the lack of social elements, but overall I'm pleased with like how close it veers to like Persona 5, like the original Persona 5 in terms of like structure and most of the gameplay outside of combat.
Awesome.
Sweet.
And you've got a preview on the website, right?
Correct. GameInformer.com.
Excellent. And when is this out?
This is out in February 23rd. And it's
On
on PlayStation 4, Switch, and PC.
Excellent. Well, thanks for
Can't get the
talking
original
about it.
Persona 5 on Switch, but you can get Persona 5 Strikers on Switch.
Perfect. All right. Well, thanks for watching, everybody. Bye.
Wow, that person was really good at playing that game. Those other people were really good at talking about it, too. If you find yourself saying either of these things, subscribe to Game Informer on YouTube for new episodes of New Gameplay Today every week, covering the hottest new and upcoming releases.